Welcome back. And for those of you that are returning, I appreciate the support a lot. Got another stack of records here. Random polls, things I've listened to, the usual. This was one that I listened to last night and again this morning. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Carcass had put out 2 or 3 albums in between Symphonies of Sickness and Necroticism? Can you even imagine what that would have sounded like if they had been, because the first 2 albums they sound very similar, although Symphonies of Sickness, the second album, is definitely an improvement on the songwriting for sure. I love both those records, by the way. That was my first experience with Carcass. But by the time they got to the third album, they had advanced quite a bit, and then of course they would triple that in between Necroticism and Heartwork. But there is a band, and I know there's a lot of bands that are Carcass worship type bands, but some of them do a really, really good job, and definitely Pharmacist is one of them. This is one of the 2 full-length albums that they have out, and then they have some splits and stuff. I have a couple of those, but the 2 main albums, this one's, with the big titles. They've got Flourishing Extremities on Unspoiled Mental Grounds. Right. This is a Japanese band. This album's from 2022. And this, to me, is what it would sound like if there were transitionary albums in between the second and the third Carcass albums. It's also got a little bit of the Heartwork style thrown in there, but yet at the same time, it's still... I hesitate to say that it's original, but it definitely is a band that you would put on. Like when you put Carcass on, you're listening to Carcass, if you're familiar with their material, especially with the different eras. But if you put this on and you're familiar with it, you'll know you're listening to Pharmacist and not Carcass. So I guess leave it at that. But it's a great listen. Both albums I like a lot. This one continues to impress me. This is an old Brazilian band. This is the first record from 1986 by Volcano. And what continues to inspire me to listen to this is just the extremity of this, how heavy and demented this thing sounds. They took what Slayer was doing and Possessed and all these bands, and they just tried to up it a little bit, and I think they were successful. I mean, I'm not saying this is a better album than any of those. I'm just saying that what's contained here is very aggressive. Definitely a template for, we can debate on who heard this album back in the day and who didn't, but there's a lot here to listen to. This band had an interesting run. I followed them up into the 90s. However, the first record remains my absolute favorite, with diminishing results as time went on. So I would definitely recommend this debut album, Bloody Vengeance. But, from there, enter at your own free will. Check it out, whatever. But yeah, great stuff. Definitely has its place in the historical realm of things. Who doesn't remember this old band? Wrathchild America, the first album. So this album was 1989 and remains my favorite. But the band had actually dated back all the way to 1979, I think, in different names. They had Atlantis, then they were called Tyrant, and then Wrathchild. They settled on Wrathchild. And it was actually Atlantic Records that forced the America to be added in 1988 when they signed record deal for this debut album. And that, of course, was because of this band, Wrathchild, from the United Kingdom. And this was a Motley Crue knockoff type band. They were like a glam band, sometimes heavy metal, not that great, but Wrathchild. So this is the reason why. And then, interestingly enough, after the limited success of this debut Wrathchild America album, Wrathchild from the United Kingdom was forced to change their name to Wrathchild UK, which started on their second record and into their third record, and I lost track of them after that because they're just really not that great of a band. Worth a listen, especially if you like hard rock and some of the glam bands of the Motley Crue and Rats and Dawkins and all that kind of stuff. This is not that quality of music though, but still it's an okay thing. But yeah, so anyway, so Wrathchild America, loved this album. Man, when I bought this, probably 1990, I listened to it for months, and I still listen to it to this day. I pulled this out not long ago. Other than the cover of Pink Floyd's Time, which is so-so, this is a very good album. I love this album. It's very musical too. It wasn't like full-on thrash or full-on speed or full-on heavy metal. It was this weird mixture, which was very effective on songs like Candy from a Madman, for instance, where you'd be going along and you're having like this great melodic metal song, and then all of a sudden there's like this thrash kind of breakdown thing going on, and just really highly effective. Hard to sit still when you're listening to an album like this. Of course, they would go on to release in 1991 their second record, 3D, which I also loved, but wasn't the biggest fan of this in 1991 when I bought it. It took a little while for it to grow on me because it's the same four guys, but they really expanded on the musicianship. These were guys that had been players in the scene for a long time. They're very musical. They're very good songwriters and very capable of playing complex rhythms and songwriting, and so they did that. But they really upped the ante on this album. This was much more in line with almost like a scatterbrain type thing, where you just got this insane playing going on that I think sometimes it's a little bit of a derivative from the music itself or the song. It doesn't always lend to the song's strength, but boy, like when you get down to like Desert Grains, What's Your Pleasure, Surrounded by Idiots, Prego, yeah, there's some good stuff on here. It's sad that I think within a couple of years of this release here, while waiting for another Wrathchild America, they just up and changed their name to Souls at Zero. And I remember hearing about that, and at first it didn't matter to me because it was the same four guys, until I brought the CD, the first Souls at Zero CD home, and yeah, other than a couple songs, it didn't do much for me at all. It was this slowed down, groovy, kind of like Pantera leftover kind of stuff. Like everybody was trying to be all heavy and everything. They'd shaved their heads and looked like Alice in Chains, which should have been fine. And it's not that these guys didn't have the ability to play great music, but they really watered it down. It just didn't do anything for me. I think it must have been around 95. I saw Souls at Zero opening up for Skid Row on the Subhuman Race tour, which wasn't exactly a great album for Skid Row either. And I remember Souls at Zero, when they came on, there was just the two bands. Souls at Zero comes on, and there were like, in the crowd of about maybe 3,000 people, there couldn't have been more than that at this place. In this crowd, there was just these sporadic people yelling, Wrathchild America, Wrathchild America. They were not having it. They didn't even want to entertain it. They didn't play a single lick from any Wrathchild America. They would not acknowledge that that's the only reaction they were getting from the crowd at all, was play Wrathchild America. And when they left the stage, I watched Brad Divins come off the stage, and of course I was a big fan of these Wrathchild America albums, and so I actually went down and shook his hand, and it was really weird because I just didn't like what he was doing at all, and he looked defeated to me. So it was kind of a sad thing to see, and that band didn't last very long before they didn't do anything. They didn't go anywhere. They put out another EP and maybe even something else, and I think I have that stuff as well, but it's unlistenable. Speaking of unlistenable, this is not unlistenable, but some of the songs on this are not so good, and it's surrounded by other tracks that are really good though. So this is the one and only Kublai Khan Annihilation album from 1987, and I'll tell you what, every single time I ever hear somebody pitch this album, it's always the same spiel. It was that Greg Handavit, I think is how you say it, was in Megadeth for like 5 minutes. That's his claim to fame. I once heard an addition to that story, which I don't know if it's true, but I heard he may have gone to school or knew David Ellefson in Michigan or someplace where they grew up. I'm not sure about that. I didn't check it, but I've heard that before. But anyway, yeah, you know, if you get a chance to buy this for a decent price, pick it up. If not, you know, you're not missing too much, but there's no real historical value. It's second tier thrash, if ever there was any. But again, there's some great songs on here, but they're sandwiched in between mediocre songs, and some of the riffing on here just doesn't go anywhere. Whereas, again, other songs, the riffing is excellent and quite good. But yeah, there is talent in the band, that's for sure. But yeah, it's too bad they couldn't pull off another half of this album that was as good as like what would be like a half of it. One day, in 1990, came home from school, plopped down on the couch, skimmed through the channels. I think we had 5 channels, and I saw Glenn Tipton on the TV, and I couldn't believe it. So I stopped, of course. What is this? And it was the PBS channel, and they were talking about a documentary that they were just about to show, and they were given all these warnings and everything. And I thought I'd hit the jackpot, because you know, you just don't get to see that. I didn't have MTV at my house. I had to go to my friend's house to record MTV. But anyway, so they played a documentary. It's about an hour, maybe a little less long, called Dreamer Deceiver, if I remember correctly. And it's the story of James Vance. Took place in 1985. Can't talk about the subject matter, but look it up. It's the James Vance case. Took place in Reno, Nevada in 1985. And it revolves around this album from 1978. And you know, it would result in Judas Priest going on trial in 1990 for that 1985 case. And again, can't talk too much about it. Don't want to get the algorithm all pissed, but yeah, they claimed that this album was able to make people do things by backwards masking. It was that famous, it was the last hurrah of the 1980s Satanic Panic and backwards masking and all that stuff. And Judas Priest ended up winning the case, but last weekend I happened across that documentary, which is available on YouTube, and so I just sat and watched it just for fun. And kind of different watching it as an adult. You kind of see the hypocrisy going on. It was something else. But anyway, they play a lot of snippets from this album, and so I pulled it out and played it. And this is just a great album. Of the old 70s stuff, this one is my favorite, which I think it's most people's favorite. But yep, love this album. It's a classic. When I was done listening to this, I was kind of pining to hear Slayer's Show No Mercy, and I thought that was kind of peculiar until I realized that a lot of the way that the leads are structured on here was influential for early Slayer, where they had that heavy metal kind of aesthetic to their aggression on the Show No Mercy on some of the songs. You got these really heavy riffs, but they're oftentimes connected by these melodic twin guitar riffs. Well, that's very reminiscent of what Judas Priest was doing back in those days, only sped up and heavied up. I listened to this the other day too, and this is another one of those albums that is very top heavy. It's Crank. It's their only no, it's not their only album. I think they had one more later on, but I didn't buy it. Maybe even 2. But anyway, this was their debut album from 1986, and this is really good heavy metal record. US kind of power metal, heavy metal. The first side especially is really good. The second side is also very good. There's a couple of dips in the quality of the songwriting. One of the things I always loved about this album, though, is the very bizarre Steve Clark influence. I'll try to explain. They're obviously much heavier than old Def Leppard, but there is this aesthetic that goes on where it's like, hey, we need a piece of music that will connect this and this piece together. And I swear the guitar player goes, well, what would Steve Clark do? Because he plays these Steve Clark riffs to connect pieces of music together and outros of song. It's like, hey, how do we end this? Well, throw a Steve Clark ending on there. And while they are original, he didn't rip anything off. It very clearly sounds like something Steve Clark would have played back in High and Dry era of Def Leppard. Not so much Pyromania, but High and Dry, maybe On Through the Night a little bit. Some of the more heavier stuff on there. Heavier stuff. Faster stuff maybe. More energetic stuff, let's put it that way. Anyway, again, another one that's worth tracking down. Don't pay too much for it, but definitely a good listen, and I have enjoyed this. I actually discovered this band on a compilation on a road trip. I used to, when I was 16, 17 years old, I'd take myself driving for hours. I lived out in the areas where you could get out in the open road for hours, no other people. And I would do that, and I would listen to $1 or $2 tapes that I would buy, and I had purchased this Best of Metal Blade tape that was very, very long. It used to eat up all the time because it was so long, it would drag. And they had a Crank song on there, and so that's how I discovered and even went looking for this album. It's because of that very reason. So again, pretty good. This one, I pulled this one out the other day. I was kind of pining for that 90s death metal sound, and I realized I hadn't listened to this one for a while. It's the fourth album from Deicide, Serpents of the Light, and I was a first day buyer on this album back when it came out in 1997, and always liked it, but it didn't have much staying power. When I go for Deicide, I still tend to go for the earliest stuff or some of the later stuff, or just randomly pick and choose. Like, there's a lot of them that I just love. But this album aged way better than I thought, and I didn't realize that until just a few years ago. This is a current repress that comes in the box set, which is why it's not in a sleeve. But this one, I always felt like this is right where the Hoffman brothers kind of started to run out of ideas. And I know that sounds bizarre because I think they made 3 more albums after this, but they weren't advancing. It was just more the same. So yeah, good songs. It's heavy. It's fast. Steve Ashim really drives this record home. He just kills it on this album. Every song is just like, boom, Steve is just driving it. You can hear it. He's totally into it. Glenn, of course, this is the period of time where his voice had gone out on tour already, and so he was still struggling with like what was going to be his new normal singing style or death metal vocal style, because he had lost the ability to do that high and that low all at the same time and stuff, and so he was really struggling. But he sounds good here. He's not quite monotone yet, as he would be on a couple of later albums. But yeah, always liked this album, but didn't really realize how much I liked it until way later. So it's something I listen to a lot more these days. This is an interesting album. Old new wave of British heavy metal. Kind of rare to find on vinyl. At least I've never seen it until I found this copy. But I've had this on CD for maybe 20 years. It's an odd album. The cover is very deceiving. It's very lightweight, new wave of British heavy metal with hard rock on it, a lot of hard rock. And it's not only front loaded, it's like 2/3 loaded. the last few songs on here are like You've Taken My Love is just difficult to hear. Sophisticated Woman is there's a middle piece to that song that is just amazing, but the rest of it is like, oh, I got to get through this part to get to that middle part, which sounds like a heavier version of Def Leppard again. However, the album is absolutely worth tracking down, if not for all of side one, most of side two. And you know, if you like kind of rock, then when the album gets into the rock kind of parts, if you like that kind of music, you'll dig the album all the way through. There is some heavier stuff on here, there's some energetic stuff on here, some total like heavy metal stuff. But yeah, this was it's from '84, like I said, United Kingdom, and it was their only album. Although I heard that they had recorded a whole other album that has never seen the light of day because the record label went out of business, if I recall correctly. So yeah, maybe someday we'll hear it. This is another one. And these guys were also from England. I had heard about this record for a long time, and I tracked it down on CD, and that was a while back, but I had been looking for this on vinyl for a long time without going online and paying the ridiculous prices that this album can ask for. But this is the debut Martial Law album from the United Kingdom band, British band. And this is the British version of Leatherwolf or Omen, you know, mixed together. Really, really good players on this. I think the vocalist had come from a rock band or something, so there is some rock on here, but most of this is good heavy metal. It's got a little bit, you know, it's got enough of that oomph to it, like Leatherwolf, you know, able to play like a ballad or whatever, but still pull off these really cool melodic hard rock heavy metal songs. They did an EP, and the EP was in '91, and this was the last thing that I wanted to track down from them. Some of that other stuff that they had done is just not for me, but yeah, this is worth tracking down as well. I just noticed this was produced by Steve Harris. Interesting. But yeah, definitely Martial Law. This one is definitely worth tracking down. There's a lot of great music on this, and very good players. Guitar solos, good writing. I like it. Okay, I remember in a short that I did a little while back, I had mentioned that I used to annoy record store owners, and I actually got a little bit of pushback on that. So let me clarify. When I was a young teenager, what would happen is I would go into these record stores that were like the independent record stores, like specifically like the Heavy Metal Shop in Salt Lake City, which is, or was at least, famous. It's still around. It's been around since the 80s. Actually, speaking of that store, if you ever saw pictures of Slayer or Metal Church back around 92 to 94 or 95, they were seen wearing Heavy Metal Shop shirts. Those all came from the same place in Salt Lake, an independent record store that specializes in metal called the Heavy Metal Shop, owned by Kevin Kirk. If you know it, you know it. But anyway, that dude was absolutely grumpy half the time. And I would go in there, here's this kid, you know, I'd go in there and I'd be like, Kevin, and I'd ask him some crazy question. But one of them that I asked him one time was, what's the heaviest thing in here? The look on his face should have told me everything that with his annoyance. First off, define heavy. Second off, how in the world would he know? He's probably got 3,000 albums in there, and no way. But anyway, I came in an additional time after that, after I'd asked him that question. He walked away from me, and when I came back in the next time, he said, I got something for you can check out. He says, this one is very heavy and I think you'll like it. So I'm like, okay. So he recommended this, which is the second Cadaver album from 1992 from Norway. And so I bought it. I took it home, and I was already a big fan of death metal and stuff, so I was listening to all the death metal, Deicide, all that stuff. And I put it on, and I'm like, this isn't the heaviest thing I've even heard, let alone the heaviest thing that I would expect to be in a store like that. Well, let me tell you, it would take years, but eventually I understood. Now, he, at the time, he's probably about at least 10, maybe 12 years older than me. So he's like an OG metal guy. Would have bought things like Kill 'Em All when it came out. Probably tape traded the demo in 1982, when I was in kindergarten. And so I didn't really understand what he was saying, but years later I would understand this album to be way heavier than the sonic heaviness of it. It's emotionally heavy, and that's probably what he was tapping into. He was way more advanced of a listener than I was at the time, and so he was definitely tapping into the emotional heft of this album. And to this day, it's a heavy death metal album, but the emotional heaviness of it is very heavy. It's the way that they play, it's the way that they write, it's the way that the songs are structured. There's a lot of depth to it. I'm not talking lyrically, I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of depth to it. Like, it really does allow for internal reflection. And so as the years have gone on, this album has only gotten heavier. Also, the fact that the band is just good players. They have the talent to write even progressive leads, Pestilence kind of level of expertise in writing leads and interludes and all that kind of stuff, and great stuff. Anyway, if this isn't something that you're familiar with, and you're looking for a little bit of an experience, but it's going to take 4 or 5 or 6 times to get into the album and start to unfold it, definitely check it out. Good stuff. This one's just a no-brainer. I listened to this morning in the office, and I'm going to listen to it again tonight because I just love this record. It's the first Atheist album. I mean, what am I going to say about this album that hasn't been completely and totally said before? Some days this is my favorite one, and other days it's Unquestionable Presence. Who's going to question that, right? Always love this record. It was much easier to find the second and the third album in the early 90s than it was this, and I don't know why. Somebody maybe can tell me in the comments or something, but I couldn't find this album. I didn't get this album until, I believe, Century Media finally put it out in like 1997, and so that was the first time I got to actually hear it. After years of listening to the second and the third album, the second album is my favorite. Some days this one's my favorite, other days, but yeah, this is a fantastic record. Just, it's that era, 1990, it's that era where thrash was morphing into death. And so a lot of these bands, Atheist, they were Rigor Mortis, all these bands, they were bands that where these guys had been sitting in their room probably playing thrash albums, learning how to play thrash songs and doing all that. And then as probably even like Possessed, Seven Churches, which is obviously considered in now to be a death metal album. That's another one that's interesting to me. Like, when I first heard that record, I mean, I knew it was heavy, but I didn't really identify that as a death metal album, because I had also heard, now this was later, this was in the late 80s, and so I had also heard actual death albums, Scream Bloody Gore. I'd heard that, and so to me that was death metal, and to me Possessed was thrash metal. In retrospect, the band, because I never heard anybody call Possessed death metal back in the 80s. I did hear black metal. I also heard that Slayer was black metal. So, it was all kind of convoluted and whatnot. But anyway, back to this. This is right in that transitionary period where these bands were still playing a lot of thrash riffs, but they had sped it up. and they had added kind of what Possessed was doing, and then what Slayer was doing on Rain and Blood with the low end, that kind of fast picking, and they had added it to it. Just great stuff. Just fantastic stuff. Definitely a killer record. So I also a few days ago had a little bit of time, and I pulled off some demos. And this one is a demo that I found very recently, and so I had been wanting to check it out and hear kind of what was going on. And it's the demos for the Rain and Blood album. And I have no idea like who put this out or where they got this from. It says made in Brazil on it, but 8 songs on here, which is weird because 7 of them are from Rain and Blood, but they also do a demo of Aggressive Perfector on here. So that's curious. It's quite a bit more sped up. What was really interesting about this was recorded in 1986, is that the songs had largely come together, but Lombardo was still kind of working out his drum parts. So there's some simplistic drums going on. Like, for instance, the beginning of Rain and Blood, he was just hitting one drum for that instead of like the 3 that he would end up doing for the album. And the other thing that was really interesting on here was that Tom Araya was really, really enunciating every word, which he does not do on the album at all. So a lot of his lines were slowed down as he was like doing this perfect enunciation. And what is unclear to me is if Rick Rubin had entered the picture or not, because I'd be really curious to know if this was just recorded on their own and then Rick Rubin was brought in later and maybe he heard this or whatever. But this is almost like a rehearsal in a lot of ways. There's talking in between some of the songs. And Jeff, he's a beast. He's very hard panned to the left on the left speaker and carries very hard panned onto the right. Oh, that's another thing too. Piece by Piece doesn't have a drum intro, it has a bass intro, a very complicated one too. It's very cool. That's the other thing too. You can hear Tom's bass on here a lot. You can kind of hear he's a more complex bass player than I tend to think he is. A lot of times when I see him playing, it's kind of a one-string thing. He's just kind of keeping tempo and keeping time, and he's doing his vocals, you know. And so that's really the star power of him. But what he does on some of these songs, you can hear it here that you can't hear it on the album as good. It's actually quite impressive. So that's pretty cool. And then Magnus, I pulled this off the shelf too. This is their power metal demo from '87. And what's interesting about this band is if you know this band from Poland, then you know that they are a death thrash band. But this is a power metal album, basically. It's 6 songs of power metal, like sounds like clean vocals and very arranged, melodic, heavy metal, power metal, kind of like a US power metal type thing. And after they would do this, by 1989, they were a completely different band in sound, speed, aggression, everything. But this is a pretty cool demo. It kind of stands on its own because it is so different from what they would do in the future. And this one I also had to pull out and listen to because this is a historical record. Obviously this is the demos for what would become Death and Mantis, and these demos are essential. They're not recorded all that well or whatever, but you can hear clearly what's going on. You can hear clearly the aggression, the speed. The vocals are insane on this. Very deathy. Totally sounds like a monster from a horror movie or something. I think that's probably by design. Another thing is Chuck's playing is already very, very interesting on here. His guitar solos are extremely clean. Even on the rehearsal stuff, he's just in every note. It's just right there. And it's interesting because this came out in 1984. And we were talking earlier about Possessed. being considered to have the first death metal album, 1985, Seven Churches, you have to wonder, like, who heard this demo? Of course, Possessed put out a demo in 1984 as well, but like, who heard this album? Who heard this demo? Because, you know, when they put out an album, you know, the record label, they know how many they made, they know how many they sent and to where. They have these analytics, but there's no analytics on these demos other than that the band will say, oh yeah, we made 10 of those, or we made 100 of those, and then we sent them out to people in the world, and then of course they tape traded them all over. So, you know, like with No Life Till Leather, they think thousands of people probably had copies of that album, that tape, before Kill 'Em All even came out. But we don't really know. We know that back in when I was first getting into like the Goldmine music magazine and stuff, and learning about like all these kinds of things, the kind of the collecting aspect that kind of comes inherently built into this love of music. I was learning, I was actually seeing, and I had to get some clarification from somebody who knew, but you would see like Metallica No Life Till Leather demo, 6th generation, it would be listed as. And that was interesting to me, because that literally means that somebody had made a copy of a 5th generation, like there was 5 removed from the original source tape. And that's how many people were like recording and giving this out to friends and sending it in the mail and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the importance of this probably will never be known, because we don't know who heard it, we don't know who was influenced by this, if anybody. And so that's why we do know that Possessed put out that album in 1985. I'm also really curious about other people's opinions about, like, was Possessed the first death metal album, or is it a thrash metal album? It's definitely, the case could be made for either, I think. I still view it as a thrashy death album, definitely influential, but like, I don't think it was the first proper death metal album as we understand death metal today. Anyway, I'd be really curious about like your comments, your thoughts on that. And if you were curious, we've been listening to Death in Action, Stuck in Time, which is their 3rd record from 1991. Pretty good band from Germany. I've recently just collected the 4 albums that they put out then, and have been slowly kind of familiarizing myself with them, and liking this one as well. It seems like all their stuff is pretty good. They kind of floated a little bit between thrash, hardcore, so basically like a crossover, but there is some punk influence here and there, and then there's some more like pure thrash going on as well. So that's what's playing now. Good stuff. Anyway, that's it for this time, but thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.